Gerry Adams, you've just arrived in Cuba. Can you describe what the mood is like on the island and how that contrasts to the last time you visited the country?
Well, I was here last year. I didn't see Fidel that time. Things hadn't much improved since I had been there previously. The rumours or news about the new rapprochement with the U.S. administration under President Obama, the ongoing talks about Colombia and the peace process there, and I participated in that. I met the negotiators that were involved in that. So all in all, the mood was good. Now, the mood now, I was trying to figure out how to describe this to you. It's like a very old and revered member of the family, a very popular member of the family, has just died. And although the news is probably expected, there's still a feeling of sadness with at the same time a sense, well, we don't live forever. So it's that sort of mix. There is great pride here, certainly with the people that I have been bumping into, and my Spanish isn't great, but and I'm sure there are people here who don't like Fidel at all, but I think most of the people respect him. And when you consider from the time when this was actually a slave state, the national liberation that was achieved in 1959, and then everything that's happened since then, people have a great sense of pride in their internationalism and how they were able to help other people in other parts of the world, how their education system and health systems are second to none. There obviously are issues here, and like all societies, there are clearly problems. I was at a big rally. Some locals are saying there are up to 1 million people in it, in the square of the Revolution last evening, and it was quite remarkable. The countries and the states and the nations who were represented at that.
And you met Castro during historic visits to Cuba. I mean, what do you remember most about the president?
Well, I met him a number of times in the course of that visit, informally, if you like, at a public event. And I listened to him speaking, and I enjoyed very much his what we in Ireland would call the crack, the sort of the banter between himself and the crowd. We then had a more formal meeting, which lasted 6 hours, and leaving aside translation times, it was very informative from my point of view. He was very humorous, self-effacing, down to earth, was conversant with the colonial history of Ireland, with the general thrust of all of that. He famously had come out in defence of the hunger strikers in 1981 and also advocated for Irish unity and an end to British rule in Ireland. But he wanted to get below the skin of all of that. He was asking about the unionists. He was asking about the farming industry in Ireland, the fishing industry. We actually don't have a fishing industry. And we also talked about global issues. He said that neoliberalism was the biggest threat to, and climate change were the biggest threats to humanity. We discussed September the 11th, and I remember well that he said that since that event that no other progressive struggle would be won by armed actions, that they would have to be won by the power of ideas and the mobilizations of people and solidarity between people. He also, and I thought this was almost a humorous little point, that he wanted to know what the Irish language sounded like. And he suggested that I would recite the Hail Mary, Sheda Bahawara, in Irish, and he would recite it in Spanish. So that's what we did. We both prayed the Hail Mary, he in his language and I in my language, and I thought that was a revealing little insight into, an avowed atheist and communist, but it shows you the power of Catholicism, that he still knew and remembered the Hail Mary.
And in ideological terms, I mean, how would you describe the similarities between Castro's Cuba and Irish republicanism, especially today?
Well, there is some criticism of the Cuban system, and some may be well enough founded. We actually raised issues about human rights and religious liberties and so on, political prisoners. But all of that has to be seen against the background of the blockade. That this society, this island, people have been basically under siege for 50 years. And while I very much welcome the postponement, and I hope that it doesn't get reversed under President Trump, I think it just makes sense to continue to build. Irish republicanism, republicanism is for a republican system of government where the people are sovereign. And I suppose that at its broadest is what our view is. But modern republicanism is based upon the Proclamation of 1916, which goes on to spell out civil and religious liberties and economic rights and social rights. And it's very, very clear that what the 1916 leaders wanted to see was an Ireland in which people could live together in equality, in fairness and decency. So the phase of struggle we're going through is for national liberation or for freedom. We want to see an end to partition, an end to British rule. We, of course, also want to keep building on the peace process and build relationships with our unionist neighbours as a part of the process of achieving that. So we're in the national freedom or the national liberation, the need for Irish unity phase of the struggle. What the people do after that is a matter for them to decide. I would like to see a socialist republic on the island of Ireland based upon the 1916 proclamation.
And finally, you attended and were part of the Guard of Honour at Nelson Mandela's funeral in 2013. Are you expecting to take a formal part in the funeral on Saturday? And how have you been received by Cuban officials and the Cuban people generally?
Well, where I'm here as a guest on the invitation of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Cuba. The international dimension of that was last evening, so I won't be at the funeral on Saturday. I'm returning home. I'm doing meetings here with officials and others within the Cuban administration. We have a good relationship with them. Insofar as, I am recognizable, and clearly I'm not as recognizable here as I would be at home. People generally identify with Ireland. They know about Ireland. There have been, as I've said, long relationships where we're both small islands with powerful neighbours that haven't treated us well. So people, particularly politically tuned in people, would know that and understand that.
Gerry Adams, thanks very much for joining us on Radio Sputnik today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.